aren't getting hurt. So anyway, looks like we can start this here workshop meeting of the City Council of Charleston. Madam Clerk, do we need to call a roll, or do you just make note of who's here and not?
No, sir, we don't need to call the roll. We're okay. Good. We have a quorum.
Great. And so the agenda says an introduction and overview of the workshop. The workshop today is about discussing our redistricting plan for our city council districts. We plan on having a staff update from Tracy McKee and whoever else she would like to participate. And then we're going to have a little citizens participation period and hear comments from the public. And then it'll be open for discussion for council members. I would also note, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, that we also plan to have a public hearing at our meeting next Tuesday at City Council in due deference, making sure we have opportunities for our citizens to be able to share their opinions with us about this redistricting issue. And if they have a preference on one of the options that we've kind of come up with, and in the event someone couldn't make it today, they can sign up and participate at our public hearing next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, either live in person at City Hall or virtually. You can participate that way as well. So without further ado, I will call on Tracy McKee, unless Jennifer, you have something else I need to cover.
That's it. We're
okay.
Ready to go.
Great. Tracy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to do my best to walk us all through the options that we have put out on our interactive map and provided some updates on the website, and hopefully provide a good background so that we can hear from citizens, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you all might have. And of course, I'll try to illustrate these plans as best I can. I do have the interactive map website ready to go in case somebody wants to look at one of these in more detail. And if you think I miss any of the high points, council members, please feel free to jump in at any time. So I think we are all very familiar now with what our purpose is, and that is to meet the constitutional requirement of one person, one vote. And what that means is rebalancing the population among all the 12 districts as best we can, so that we have less than 10% deviation total, which means that no one district can be plus or minus 5% of the target population we're trying to reach. So our guiding principles, first, obviously, is rebalance the population. Districts must also be contiguous, so we can't create a district. One district can't cross another district, if you will. So we have to maintain contiguity. And then some of the other guiding principles that we do our best to try to follow: minority representation, compactness, constituent consistency, communities of interest. And as you all are very much aware already, balancing these additional principles is challenging. So, but I think we've done our best to try to find a balance. This is a table with a lot of numbers that you all have seen many times before. For the public who may be seeing this for the first time, our first step in redistricting is to take our current districts that we have and apply the 2020 census data or the new census data to our current districts to find out how much things actually do need to be rebalanced. So this is just by district, total population in 2010, and then what it is based off of the 2020 census and how much change has occurred in each of these districts. And then the number of population change that needs to happen. Of special note, as you all are very much aware, We've seen tremendous growth in districts 1, which is Cane Hoyd, Daniel Island area. That district increased by 73% from 2010 to 2020. And then also a significant increase in District 5 and the outer West Ashley, Johns Island area. That district increased by 154% over the past 10 years. And that's compared to a 25% increase for the whole city, which in itself is impressive. And so when we look at those 2 districts alone, we know that that is significant. And obviously, when we saw those, we knew that it would have a significant impact on our redistricting effort. So just a little bit, I talked about this a little bit at the update a few weeks ago, but I thought it might be worth to dive into a little bit more tonight or this afternoon. Before we even really started creating scenarios and plans, we did an initial outreach survey to citizens to understand how they were feeling about redistricting, number one, but also how they wanted to be engaged in the process. And so we got 184 responses from that initial survey. The chart on this slide actually shows the representation of those districts. What I find interesting is 27% said they weren't sure or preferred not to answer which district they live in. But 80% of people that responded were concerned about transparency. For us, that was not surprising, but also concerning. And so I think we've made a really good effort to try to keep people informed as best we can throughout the process and allow for them to provide comments along the way. 78% of those that responded said they wanted to be kept updated digitally. Very few actually said they wanted any sort of in-person meetings or workshops on redistricting. 65% actually preferred just an email update. That's all they really wanted. And 95 of those that responded actually provided an email address to receive notifications. So we took heed of that, collected all those email addresses, and have been sending out email notices to those that wanted to receive those. That list is about 100 recipients. Through that avenue, we've actually collected about 30 comments specifically regarding specific plans. We've also worked with business and neighborhood services to communicate updates through their weekly newsletter. As you all know, we had a public redistricting webinar. We had 42 people register for that webinar, and it's actually had 166 YouTube views, which I think is quite a lot for redistricting. And then we also tested out a new platform called Open Town Hall. So we posted information there about redistricting, and it's a good platform for soliciting and getting comments back on projects. And so we actually had 152 views and 110 comments submitted through that platform. We also utilized the citizen engagement portal, received about 10 comments through that medium. And then, as you all know, we've had an interactive web map available to show the various plans in their various states. And that interactive web map has seen over 3,200 views since July 1st of this year. So quite an active website. So jumping right into it, as you all know, we really have kind of 3 options that we have out on the interactive map now. The first one we're calling option 1A. This is essentially the first original draft that we shared with the public. And of course, we got public comment back on that draft, and we incorporated as much as we possibly could into this version here shown as 1A. Maybe for the public, this could use a little bit of explanation. District 1, kind of at the top right corner, that was one of the districts that experienced significant growth. We knew that that area would have to shrink in nature, which meant that one of the districts on the peninsula, simply because of contiguity, would have to expand over into the areas of Berkeley County. It made the most sense for District 8 to become that district that grew in that direction or moved in that direction, knowing that the areas in Berkeley County were too big to have just one representative, too many people over there. And then, of course, we see on Johns Island, District 5 almost had to be cut in half. And so, because it had grown so big. And so this option has District 11, which was already kind of in Riverland Terrace, basically going across or down Maybank Highway, if you will, and expanding into Johns Island. And here is the table that goes along with option 1A. You all saw this in my update a couple weeks ago. I think there were maybe a couple of very, very minor changes since that update just a couple weeks ago. The second one is 1B, slight variation, if you will, from option 1A. In this scenario, District 12, however, shifts over to pick up some of those areas on Johns Island as opposed to 11. And then, of course, that shifts District 11 because District 11 still needs to add people. So it just moves District 11 further out into West Ashley. And I see Councilmember Shade just got a phone call. He was kind of the architect of this plan, so I was going to invite him to provide any additional commentary he might have on this particular version. But we'll ask him when he returns. And then here are the numbers that go along with option 1B. Just a big, ugly number chart, I know, sorry. And then option 2 has what we had been calling kind of alternatives 1A and 1B. And so we just kind of gone away from, really trying to put out different numbers on, we know that it's going to be, 3 or 6 that would move to from the peninsula to Johns Island. But we thought it was basically the same plan. So we've just kind of incorporated into one option. There's been very little change, I think, since we presented this to y'all just a couple weeks ago. Like I said, maybe a few minor tweaks here and there, but it looks very, very similar, generally speaking. Councilmember Shade, I see you've returned. I wanted to offer you the opportunity if you had any additional commentary on option 1B.
Yeah, trying to unmute. And thank you, Tracy. Tracy and I met, I guess, about, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Tracy? And it takes a lot longer than I anticipated going through this. It's very meticulous, and she was very patient with me. But I just wanted to give y'all an overview of what I did with Tracy. So I took literally option 1A and started with that as our starting point. And wanted to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the existing council districts without doing too much gymnastics of crossing over into other areas and expanding too far. I also wanted to make sure that we maintain the minority majority districts for districts number 4 and number 7. And then I asked Tracy to minimize these districts in District 1, 4, and 7. I think we did that right, Tracy, to make sure that we were within that 5% area. And so this is more of a expansion, I guess, of option 1A. And what it contains is you see that District 8 is over in parts of the Daniel Island area. District 1 is all of Daniel Island. District 10, I'm sorry, districts 4, 8, 3, what else am I missing? Are stay on the peninsula. So it's not having to make a decision of District 3 and 6 moving off the peninsula. So 6, 3, 4, and 8. The other thing that was really of a concern to me is that by moving District 1 exclusively on Daniel Island, the peninsula was losing a council member vote. And with the other variations, the peninsula was going to lose 2. So instead of having 1, 8, 3, 4, and 6, they're losing 1 completely, and they're down from 5 to 4 council members representing portions of the peninsula. And then, as Tracy pointed out, what I did for District 5 and District 12, which is Councilmember Parker and Councilmember Brady districts, is that I took and expanded them into James Island, Johns Island, and West Ashley, Johns Island. So what you have now is a very balanced, I think, approach to this, with the Daniel Island, Kanehoy area guaranteed 2 city council representatives. Johns Island is guaranteed 2 council representatives, even though that Johns Island will have their council members representing parts of either James Island or West Ashley. I didn't do a vote count as to how that split up, by the way. We just wanted to make sure that we didn't do any violence to Councilmember Parker's district or Councilmember Brady's district, kept them in their home district and expanded their boundaries into Johns Island each. It also took in consideration the expansion, I think, where the population growth is going to be with District 10 and District number 2. We know that's going to be a growing area, as well as District 5 and 12 and District 1 and 8. So bottom line is that we maintained the majority districts. We made sure that Daniel Island, Kanehoy got 2 representatives. Johns Island got 2 representatives. The peninsula loses just 1 and not 2 of its representatives. And while Councilmember Gregory's boundaries on District 6 expand a little bit, more on the James Island, you still are balancing out so that we're not pitting Council 3 and Council 6 against one another. And I remember what Councilmember Mitchell talked about last time at City Council when they had to make that decision. But he also made this very important point that we're not eliminating a district seat. The decision was more along the lines of 2 existing current council members. I'm not saying this properly, Councilmember Mitchell, but I just remember how you phrase that so much more eloquently than what I'm trying to do here, is that the other alternatives annihilates a council representative, and that person is prohibited from running until 2025. He's not even allowed to run in the next election cycle. So I just see this as being a very balanced and fair approach. I have no particular other feelings about how this all shakes out. Council may want to tweak this a little bit more, but I think that this sort of just shows us a good balanced approach to the whole way system. And I took Councilmember Rappel off of Johns Island. I thought it was kind of odd that he was going to represent some scenario parts of West Ashley, parts of James Island, and parts of Johns Island. That seemed a little bit confusing to me and not in the best interest of the citizens of Johns Island. Thanks, Tracy. I hope I didn't over talk too much. And I think I covered all the points that you and I went over together, didn't I? You
Yes.
nodded.
So I just wanted to make sure, that you gave it its due overview. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, jumping to.
Just a question for Councilman Shade. In terms of, what were those numbers again you were saying with respect to the peninsula? The peninsula has never had 5 representatives.
You got, as it stands right now.
We do right now.
You do right now. You got District 1, 4, 3, 1, 3, 4, 6, 8. right now. That's 5. And with the other plans, you would lose the peninsula's losing it down from 5 to 3. This loses it from 5 to 4.
And 1A does the same. 1A goes from 5 to
Right.
4 as well.
The council members may not all live on the peninsula, but their district includes a piece of it. And back to 1A for a minute, if you will, Tracy. So it basically does the same things that 1A did, other than mostly keeps 11 off of Johns Island. Seems like the biggest difference to me, but I could be missing something else. But
No, Mayor, that's probably accurate. You keep 11 off of Johns Island, and District 12 picks up more of Johns Island.
correct. So most of all those same objectives that you mentioned were very thoughtfully thought about and worked out by Tracy to come up with option 1A in the first place. But you know, you've made some interesting tweaks, no question about it. Thanks. So back to presentation.
No problem. So the final one again is this option 2, which we've been calling kind of alternatives 1A and 1B, which was essentially the same plan. And so this time we've just called it one option, understanding that there's a decision, that there would be a decision to be made on, you know, which number would leave the peninsula, but it would be the same plan. So we've drawn it as such. And like I said, I think there's been a couple of small adjustments to it based off some feedback after the last council meeting, but they're very minor. But I could look through them, you know, kind of after the meeting if people are really interested in those details. But they are very minor. And then, of course, here's the associated table of all the numbers. And I think probably what will be more useful is kind of 2 slides from now. But here I do have a summary that kind of compares all 3 options. And all I did on this table, and you all should have received a copy of this as well already. But it does by option, the percent deviation total by the plan and by district, and then as well as the percent of all minorities by district. So you have a quick reference of those. And then if we kind of do an even more, you know, kind of step back summary, if you will, when we talk about kind of a secondary priority for each one. Again, 1A and 1B kind of minimize change, if you will. They call it constituent consistency, right? So it's about minimizing change and representation for citizens, and keeping council members in their districts, because obviously that impacts a lot of citizens. And then option 2, I would say, prioritizes compactness and communities of interest. And so when we look at citizens impacted, 1A and 1B are both at 31%. Option 2, 38% of citizens would have a change in representation. Majority minority districts, those are essentially the same. The percentages do vary across all 3 plans though. And then when we look at kind of minority influence, and again, I did this at the presentation a couple of weeks ago. So looking at 20%, is it greater than 25% or even 30%? And how many districts meet that in each of these plans? So obviously the biggest change is in that greater than 25%. Option 1A provides 7, 1B provides 4, and option 2 is 5. And then at 30%, options 1A and option 2 actually provide 3 districts that have greater than 30% minority influence. And I think that's all I have to cover. But I'm more than happy to try to answer any questions if that's appropriate, or I don't know if we go straight to citizen participation.
Let me ask Jennifer how many folks have signed up to make comments to us.
We have 5 people who have signed up to speak, and we also received 3 comments, and citizens participation is the next item on the agenda.
Well, without objection from council, let's proceed and hear from our citizens next. And that'll leave us the entire remainder for us to discuss. So you want to call out, I guess, by name, and will they be able to Zoom in? Are they calling in on the phone?
We have citizens joining by phone. And did you want to set a time limit, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, let's, since we don't have that many, let's set a 2-minute period, which we want to be able to hear their thoughts. That'd be fine.
All right, our first speaker is John Slogar, and you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. And the time is 2 minutes.
Okay, do you have me?
Yes, sir. Welcome.
Great. Hey, well, thank you very much, Mayor. Hey, hi, my name is John Zlogar, and I'm the chairman of the Johns Island Task Force. First of all, I'd like to thank you for holding this workshop to obtain additional input from staff and the public. So the question from our perspective is 1, 2, or 3 districts on Johns Island. Now, at the end of the day, the issue of redistricting is not about maintaining the number of districts on the peninsula, despite the growth elsewhere, or ensuring the seats of current council members. Rather, it's how to best serve the citizens of Charleston. So how can Johns Islanders best be served? Well, they certainly aren't served by moving the chess pieces around and putting the residual pieces on Johns Island, as we just heard option 1 does. But what do Johns Islanders think, as opposed to folks that don't live on the island? Well, our local email newsletter, the Johns Island Advocate, asked its readers how many districts should be on the island. They had 193 responses. By the way, that 193 responses is probably larger than most of the responses that Tracy talked about just now. And of those, 86%, over 86%, wanted a single district on Johns Island. They also had many well thought out comments. Perhaps the best one was short and sweet. It was, it's that obvious to Johns Islanders that it should be, and it should be that obvious to council members, that there should be 1 district on Johns Island. For years, indeed decades, Johns Islanders have felt like stepchildren who did not have a seat at the table. Year after year, our population grew, but we were still relegated to the children's table, while the rest of the city had their 12 seats at the big table. Johns Island is now a strapping adult whose population will continue to outpace most of the other areas of the city. After these many years of being a stepchild, it's past time for Johns Islanders to join the peninsula, West Ashley, James Island, and Daniel Island with a seat at the big table. I urge you to adopt option 2, or perhaps we should simply call it the option. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Shana Howe.
Do you have me?
There you are.
I am Shana Howell, and I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. For the past few years, I have studied and advocated for best practices in redistricting as the co-chair of the Redistricting Work Group of LWV South Carolina. At the state level, South Carolina voters have long fallen victim to incumbent gerrymandering, and this year was no exception. For instance, many City of Charleston voters on the peninsula have expressed their dismay over being put in a congressional district with areas as far-flung as Allendale and Richland counties instead of with the rest of Charleston County. One best practice that many states and municipalities now utilize to avoid this type of gerrymander is an independent redistricting commission, which ensures that politicians are not drawing their own district lines. While the city did not use an independent commission, I want to applaud you for your commitment to making information available to the public and inviting and incorporating feedback. And to be honest, I'm not sure an independent commission could have done much better than what you present in option 2. Option 2, formerly titled Alternative 1A and 1B, meets the league's criteria of preserving communities of interest while creating relatively compact districts that will make sense to voters and make it easier for council members to travel to and serve their constituents. We are pleased to see that all options preserve 2 majority-minority districts. The original map, now titled Option 1A and 1B, present several problems, including for Peninsula voters. In order to protect 4 incumbents, the map would split the peninsula into 4 different districts, with the bulk of 2 of them lying in other parts of the city. Voters in many municipalities have fought against this type of district cracking that divides their voice. If the original maps were passed, 1/3 of current council members would reside on the peninsula, even though the peninsula's population is not near 1/3 of the city population and is not where growth has occurred since the last round of redistricting. This can be marketed as a deal for peninsula voters, but it really isn't. They could easily find themselves in an opposite situation after the next election, with less representation living on the peninsula than population would indicate,
Time.
and with representatives that are not tuned into their unique needs.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for your comment. Thank you.
Vicky Westberg.
*6 to
Got
join.
it. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Welcome, Vicki.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Council, for your service and for this opportunity to speak. My name is Vicki Westberg. I serve as co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Charleston area. We applaud City Council for sharing your ongoing work on your website and for inviting groups like the League of Women Voters to provide feedback and, most importantly, for responding to that feedback. In an apparent glitch, the recently published alternative maps were renamed from Alternative 1A and 1B to Option 2 without public notice. This created a situation where members of multiple advocacy groups have been asked to support mislabeled maps, and previous testimony and letters to the editor in the Post and Courier are now on record advocating for the wrong maps. We appreciate that this change was publicized after we pointed out the error and ask Council to be judicious as you sort through testimony, as many will still be confused that Option 2 is now in fact the previous choice of Options 1A and 1B. Aside from this temporary glitch in transparency, we are urging the adoption of Option 2, which represents good redistricting principles, maintaining communities of interest, creating compact and contiguous districts, and reflecting population growth by reducing the number of representatives on the peninsula. Thank you for providing us this opportunity to provide such important public feedback on Council's redistricting process and the resulting maps.
Thank you so much.
Leslie Scarden. And it's *6.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Leslie Scarden, and I serve as the Director of Advocacy for the League of Women Voters of the Charleston area. And I am also a citizen of the city of Charleston. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate. So far, you've heard multiple perspectives from the League's leadership, and we have one more to come. I agree with and reinforce their testimony and ask the city to adopt Option 2. As to not be repetitive, my comments through the lens of a constituent and citizen of the city. I live on James Island. Last year, my husband and I moved a few miles down the road from one end of the island to the other. We now live in District 12, which to Council's credit is a mostly compact, contiguous, and fair district that keeps parts of James Island together as a community of interest. Unfortunately for my old neighbors, both the current and originally proposed maps, now named Option 1A and 1B, do them service. Option share those Woodland Shores and Maybank Highway residents with Hampton Park downtown. This does not make sense geographically or in terms of keeping communities of interest together. The explanation for why District 6 is drawn like this, many assume to protect the incumbent who lives on the peninsula. This is another example of how Options 1A and 1B do not follow the criteria for compactness, contiguity, or uniting communities of interest. Option 2 is much stronger for James Island. It keeps the southeastern side of the island together in District 12 and then matches the other parts of the island with areas that share similar interests, such as common traffic patterns. Option 2 also shores up representation for our neighbors to the west. Option 2 gives Johns Island its own district and preserves a key community of interest. This will give them a stronger voice on council and the representation they deserve. Please vote in favor of Option 2.
Thank you, ma'am.
Joan Zaleski.
Joan,
And
if you'd hit *6. You'll be able to join us.
Yes?
Al, we got
Thank-
you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. So I am the last of the 4 members of the League of Women Voters to speak tonight. I am Joan Zaleski, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Charleston area. And like my colleagues who have spoken before, I urge you to vote for option 2. And I just want to say something about the League of Women Voters, that we are a nonpartisan organization. We go back 102 years. The City Council recognized that 2 years ago. And we've continued to advocate for fair voting and representation for all voters. And as Shana Howell said, for the past several years, we have been working across South Carolina on the redistricting process. And we believe in everything that we do, that voters need to choose their representatives, not the other way around. We were disappointed in the resulting state and congressional district maps that have been drawn by our state legislators. And that's why the League was very pleased to be invited by Charleston City Council redistricting team to review the draft maps and request feedback. And we commend City Council on your transparency and responsiveness, and have said so publicly to the Post and Courier. Despite some recent changes on your website, has been mentioned by Vicki Westberg, leading to confusion of what options 1A, 1B, and option 2 mean, we believe your process and responsiveness is a model for other municipalities and our state legislators to follow. As a result, we are here tonight to urge City Council to pass redistricting option 2. These maps create compact and contiguous districts and keep communities of interest together. The new Johns Island district unites the community of interest. Thank you, and I urge you to vote for option 2.
Thank you so much for being with us.
And Mr. Mayor, those were all the speakers that we had signed up. We did receive 3 comments online.
Yes,
Lauren Chapman said that she advocated that the city adopt option 2, which provides a single district for Johns Island and is aligned with the survey results collected from the Johns Island Advocate, in which 167 out of 193 total responders, 86% are in favor. After decades of being neglected, she said it was time for Johns Island to have a meaningful seat at the table. Pamela Lapp said she was a resident of Johns Island and was in favor of option 2. Sorry, we're getting some feedback. And she said that there needed to be one district with a representative from Johns Island. Allison Vaughn said that Johns Islanders wanted option 2 for redistricting Johns Island as one city council district. And those were all the comments we received.
well, thank you. Thank you for y'all who participated and shared your comments with us. We really appreciate it. And so that ends our citizens participation period, and we'll go back now to council questions and discussions. Anybody want to kick it off? Councilmember Shealy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question, I guess, for either Tracy or Robert. If when you're looking at 1B, do we know what percentage of District 5 and what percentage of District 12 would actually be living on Johns Island for each of those districts?
I don't have that handy. That's definitely something that we could calculate over the next couple of days, though.
Okay, thank you.
And could you go back to that 2B map? And there's obviously a lot of discussion here about Johns Island and their representation. And I did note there's a little corner of red over there that's technically, I think, on Johns Island. It's that development right when you go over the bridge. Is there some
Grimble Gates, I think. So
yeah. If you were going to have two over there, would it make sense for that portion to also be a part of District 5, just to empower those, if it ended up this way, two districts, they'd have more of Johns Island that way, a little bit more than less? I don't know, just a thought. Okay, Councilmember Waring?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually think, and I want to thank Tracy. It's amazing all these different plans that she has kept up with. And this is just a sampling here. But that said, and I certainly appreciate all the comments from the people and the people from Johns Island for really stepping up and letting their voices be heard. That said, I think one thing that will make it a lot easier from here is we just need to decide whether we're going to have a self-contained district on, I say self-contained, but basically a continual district on Johns Island where they can elect a person who lives and resides on Johns Island. Because if we have that vote and we said, and the majority says, we agree with the voices that spoke up on Johns Island, then I think the rest of it kind of begins to fall in place. Then we only have to decide what district is going to move. And this piece about a district not moving from the peninsula is we've just done it before. I mean, we've done it in 2010. We've done it certainly before the end. Councilmember Mitchell gave, and I believe Seekings gave some information on how it was done before. So, but I think the part that would make it a whole lot easier for the public as well as us, moving all this stuff around, the moment we vote, should we vote, and I got to tell you, that's the way I'm going to vote anyway. I can speak for myself. I will vote for the people on Johns Island to have a representative that lives on Johns Island and can bring the voice of people who experience the people who have to endure what they do endure on Johns Island, the traffic, the drainage, etc. Just like we do West Ashley or certainly James Island. It's been invaluable to have a voice coming from James Island. So same thing with Johns Island. I think once we were to declare that, I think it makes Tracy's job easier. I think it makes it easier for the league, the people in Johns Island, or whoever want to look at our transparency to follow the remainder pretty well. I think it makes it easy to make those tight packed contiguous districts that one of the other plans shows. It makes it, I think it makes this whole job eminently easier if we decide that, and then the remainder of the districts will kind of fall in place and hopefully be contiguous and tight. But anyway, that's just my opinion. We've got 12 others on here. Thank you, Mr. Nick. Thank you, Mr. Nick.
Thank you. Good observation. That would drive the decision, no question about it. And it's clear, at least the feedback we've gotten from our citizens, the ones who are most interested in this whole matter or revolve around this interest, around this issue of a kind of guaranteed seat for Johns Island on City Council. All right, anybody else? Questions or comments? Come on, I was expecting a lot of conversation this afternoon. Nobody else? Councilmember Shade.
But I really do appreciate all the comments that we heard from the various groups and organizations. And do we have a timetable of when this is going to come in front of council, Mayor? Have we decided that yet?
Well, not strictly. We have the public hearing this coming Tuesday, and so it's on the agenda and would allow us to go ahead and entertain a motion after that public hearing if council was so inclined to go ahead and take action. I know that was one train of thought. I think Councilmember Seekings mentioned that. We're pretty well clear what our alternatives are, and as Councilmember Waring stated, it almost gets down to this one issue, and then it kind of solves itself other than a few outstanding questions. So anyway, if y'all are prepared to take action, it won't bother me to entertain a motion this coming Tuesday.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Mitchell.
Okay. You know, I was watching all this and I know something has to be done.
Yes, sir.
My only dilemma that on the redistricting, and this would be the third one that I was involved in, and then two before, and first got on council, district was merged together, which was District 2 and District 4, and they created a new District 2, West Ashley, when they moved District 2 off of the peninsula. And they made that District 4, and that's when District 4 picked up all the east side and a couple of other areas. And but like I was saying, that I have never seen all district and even district merged together. That's something in the 20 years or 24 years I have never seen that, and that was giving me some dilemma. I know things have changed, but that gave me some kind of sour taste for me when a even district just ran and was just elected for a year. People voted for a district for a person to be able to serve 4 years. And my dilemma is that if you do that, even if you're merging the districts together and two council members have to run against one another because you're merging odd district and even district together, to me, it's just showing and doing something really, to me, unbelievable to a person who just ran and was only there for a year and a half or 2 years. When the odd district all have already served their 4 years, which was elected to do, which is next year coming, it'll be 4 years. So it's nothing personal with me. Doesn't matter one way or the other, because something has to be done. But it just gives me a bad taste to see something like that happen, because I was involved in it and I got off the council and I came back 4 years later and ran 4 years later. That happened. But these seats, like I tell people, does not belong to us. It belongs to the people in the community. So if something like that happens, we have to take it with a grain of salt and just keep on moving on. If that's the case, if that's what's going to happen. So I took it and left gracefully. And I say, if something like that happened, that's what it have to be. If the redistricting, if we seeing the numbers fall the way it is, we can't go back and say a lot of people didn't send the census blank back in. That's null and void now. We have to go by the numbers that we have. But I just don't want to see someone who just got elected, and then serving and was voted in for 4 years and only going to serve 2 years and come back and run again against someone else who district will be actually over with, to me. And then, like I tell people, it's nothing personal with me. Doesn't matter one way or the other, but it's nothing personal. But I like to see things that's done right and correct. And that's one thing with me. Decent and in order, and this has happened, it happened. We just take it and move on. So that was my only dilemma in all this with the redistricting. And I know Tracy have done a marvelous job, and Tracy and I worked together ever since I've been on council going through all these redistricting. And she'll tell you, I've been right there, and been here and have seen it all. Some of the council members have not seen it all as I did, except Councilman Seekings know a lot of some of it. But I have seen it all and been involved in it all, you see, more so than other council members know anything about it. I was involved and been there and been involved in the, getting off a council because of it, but came back, but it was two even district merged together. So we had to run against one another in that sense. And I told him I wasn't going to do it because the faith that I have and the way I was raised, I don't do it. Running against another person who was African-American at the time. So that's why I did not do it. And I stayed away. But then the person who ran did something, got involved in things, and he left. And I came back and had 7 people run against me. But, with God willing, I came back on council and still there so far. This, almost 20 years, so this is what I'm saying. Things have to be done, and we have to take what's coming that way if it's going to be, if that's the best plan that's there is, then we have to take it and move on. And that's just the way I'm looking at it. You know, nothing personal against anyone, because I love everyone. It's nothing personal, but this is the way it has to be. Thank you.
We hear you. All right. Any other comments or questions? Go back, Tracy, if you would, to the Johns Island single district, if you will.
And Mr. Mayor, I think Councilmember Parker just had her hand.
Yeah, I was going to call on her, and I was just looking to see, based on Councilmember Mitchell's comment, which the districts up for this next year are the odd numbered districts, right? So
that's correct. That's correct.
So there's not another odd numbered district on the peninsula to match 3 with, to do what Councilmember Mitchell mentioned before, when 2 and 4 were merged, so to speak, or put together. So you just by coincidence have a different situation. I get it. All right, Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know this sort of might not be an interactive, with the public, and I know this really probably doesn't help any, but I do want to point out, Johns Island, I believe, when was that election? District 5 has always been there. I think the election was back in 2018. It's not that Johns Island has never had a seat at the table. Anyone from Johns Island could have run at that point. So I just want to make sure, because, when I got into this, I certainly wanted James Island to continue to have representation. And as you know, we have 3 members on James Island and 1 that lives on James Island. So I just feel like that. I keep hearing that, and I understand you, Johns Island. I totally hear you, but it's always someone from Johns Island could always run. Again, I understand that doesn't really help us move forward, but I do think it. I hear them. I hear Johns Island loud and clear, as I'm one of the ones that sort of keeps getting nudged over to Johns Island, and Johns Island continuously says, we don't want multiple council member district. That's fine. I mean, I really prefer focusing on James Island. I will happily focus on Johns Island as well if the body so decides. But I also hope that Johns Island, I think one commenter mentioned, that yes, that Johns Island, if it's a single member district on Johns Island, I hope that they don't forget that they'll have a piece of James Island as well. And I understand that, that section does, a commenter said it perfectly, kind of, they struggle with very similar traffic issues. So it makes sense, but they are picking up an island as well. So we, and we welcome it. I certainly have spoke my piece in city council chambers. I think having multiple members is fine. That is also not to say that I want another island. I am fine with y'all having a single member district. And more than anything, I hear you. And the majority of comments that I'm seeing are leaning towards option 2. And clearly, that is where this body has to decide what to do, because that's what I'm hearing. So anyway, just some thoughts I wanted to put out there.
Understood. Good thoughts. Good comments. All right. Councilmember Appel?
Yeah, I got a comment, I guess. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that the recent experience we all had with Hurricane Ian is an additional data point we now have in this discussion that we maybe didn't have the last time we all got together and talked about this. In the run up to the storm and in the aftermath of the storm, I think we can point to reasons why having compact districts has value. I'll give you an example. As the storm was coming, I knew the exact trouble spots in the exact places where the Vector trucks needed to go, and was because I had a very intimate knowledge of the district I represent. The more you stretch districts, the more it hurts constituent services. And I'll throw myself out there. I'm not criticizing anybody on council. I'm criticizing myself. There are currently parts of my district that I don't know as well as the parts that are closest and nearest to where I live. And that's just a reality of the situation. And the current districts we have, the way it's set up, is a bit of a gerrymandered situation to begin with. The original map, what we're now calling 1A and 1B, are extensions of that gerrymandered process. It's additional stretching. So you really get districts that are pretty far removed from what you have. Being a council member has a lot of different implications. We're part legislators, we're part ombudsmen that field complaints about trees and ditches and things of that nature. Frankly, I sometimes think the legislative aspect of the job is sort of an afterthought sometimes. I think primarily we're sort of the city of Charleston citizens' liaison to their government. And I think that when you look at our job through that lens, the compact council seats make so much sense. It allows us to provide better customer service to our constituents. We don't have dedicated staff. We've got wonderful staff in all the different departments that are tremendous resources, but we don't have people that work for each of us individually that can field calls and field emails. If we do, and y'all aren't telling me about it, this is not funny, and it's been almost 3 years now, and you should tell me about it. But the reality of it is we're the ones fielding those calls, those emails, those Facebook messages, etc. And when you know your district, when you live your district, when you walk your district, play your district, work your district, you're going to provide better services to the city of Charleston. And I think that this recent episode with the hurricane demonstrates that. It shows the value of having compact districts. If District 11 were to be changed, the district I represent, to include West Ashley, James Island, and Johns Island under the original plan that came out, I can't provide good service to all of those areas equally. It's not possible, and I'm going to humble brag a little bit. I take this job pretty seriously, and I try my best, and that would be extremely hard for me to do, and I think it would be hard for most people to do. The last benefit I would say about option 2 is when you bump into people in the supermarket and you bump into people on the streets, you could explain the district you represent using English words. Use words to explain the area you represent. You're not going to have to show somebody a map and get into all kinds of crazy contorted aspects. And I think that, it's sort of a joke, but it's also some reality. I mean, that slide Tracy showed about surveying the citizens about who their council members are, we all function much better as a city when our public and our constituents have a better understanding of how things work here, who the representatives are, and where they represent. And so I'm a big proponent of option 2. I think there's no gerrymandering involved in option 2. It's not a map that's based upon incumbency protection. Yes, it's going to have some impacts to current council members and things of that nature. We can have those discussions at a later date, but I agree wholeheartedly with Councilmember Waring. I think we ought to sort of make the decision about a single Johns Island district at the next council meeting. I think we ought to put that on the agenda or have that up for a vote, and then the rest can fall into place, and we can actually start making some progress on this. And I know Tracy would appreciate that. So with all that being said, I will rest. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anyone else? Councilmember Shade.
So,
Mr. Mayor, I think Councilmember Seekins.
Go ahead. I've already spoken. I'll give the Councilmember Seekins.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Councilmember Seekins.
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, a couple of things. I like hearing Councilmember Appel's description of being able to describe your district in English, and I agree with that. I mean, when you show it to a kindergarten class, you ought to be able to explain exactly what you're doing. But I want to hear the English you're going to use to describe the newly configured District 8, because under any scenario, it's going to be a challenge.
Well, it's south of Broad, and then you go over to Daniel Island.
Then you go up a couple of rivers, over a couple of bridges, into a new county. So two things. One is the advocacy groups that spoke today. Thank you for coming out. I would be very interested to hear at our public comment period, if you come back to City Council next Tuesday, you were very strong on your advocacy for version 2. I would be interested to hear what you say about whether we should put a number 3 on it or a number 6 on it. I think that's a big issue. And I do think, fellow council members, it's time for us to vote on this next Tuesday. Let's vote. I mean, if option 2 is the option, which it sounds like by a majority of the comments, both from the public and around this virtual table, option 2 will carry the day, then we got to vote on it and move forward. It's taken a long time to do this. There's no reason to put it off anymore. I think everyone pretty much knows Tracy's worked really hard on this. There's other things for us to be paying attention to. So I'm certainly ready to vote. I'm certainly ready to make a motion that we do that next Tuesday when we're in front of it. But I would like to hear from those advocacy groups about the manner in which we denominate the Johns Island District.
Thank you, sir. And I think it would be reasonable if we proceed as Councilmember Waring first recommended, and just have a motion on the establishment of the singular Johns Island District, and we get that settled. Then if we need to take another meeting to come back and tweak anything and, have some more discussions about 3 or 6, we could finalize it at the next meeting. Maybe y'all be ready Tuesday, but I'm just saying that wouldn't be a terrible situation either. It would resolve it in fairly short order. Councilmember Brady.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate and want to thank all the other council members as well for their comments. And as has been mentioned, the members of the public and the advocacy groups coming out. I do agree with Councilmember Seekings. I think the best kind of path forward is if option 2 is the one that folks want to go with. And, obviously I'm the one most impacted by that decision. We can go ahead and make that decision. And then I think to Councilmember Seeking's point, then deciding which district would need to be the one that gets moved, we can have public comment that would be able to come in for that. And I think that I don't think having the public be able to have as much input as possible and us being as transparent as possible is a bad thing. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Shade or Jennifer, do you have some?
So, Mr. Mayor, just procedurally, I think for next week, and I'm going to put Julie on the spot. I know that in order to approve the plan, you have to bring an ordinance to council. So maybe next week would be an opportunity for council to give staff a directive as to which plan they would like to proceed with. I don't know if I think that's a legal question as to whether or not there can be an up or down vote next Tuesday, because I think we need to have an ordinance with it.
I see. You have some response to that?
No, I think Jennifer's right on that one. This was just a workshop today, so there can't be any actual action taken today. And
and I think they're talking about
next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Are we just carrying one map into the Tuesday?
So we're having a public hearing on all of the draft maps. And I think what was being proposed is that City Council take a vote on which map or plan they want to proceed with. And then maybe that could be more of a directive so that staff can come back with the ordinance with a plan, just procedurally.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Okay, Councilmember Shade, I hate to keep putting you off, but Councilmember Saccharin hadn't been heard yet, so let me hear from him and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, I guess, just to comment on Councilman Brady's suggestion. I'm fine with how we are planning to proceed. I agree with Councilman Waring, and first step is trying to determine if we want to have multiple council folks on Johns Island or one single member. What I do not think is a good idea is opening it up to public comment regarding which version, because it's going to become, my concern is that we're going to have folks coming to council vying for Councilman Gregory, vying for me, and that's not the tone we want to set in council. Rallying votes to come to do that. I think this is a tough decision. I think council needs to make this decision as a team, as a group, and I'm supportive of whatever that decision makes. But I'm not trying to, unload that decision, that tough, controversial decision on another body or on a group of citizens. I think it's important that we make that decision as a team.
Absolutely. Thanks. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate the opportunity that we had here. When I first introduced this idea of this workshop, I knew that there was going to be some pushback on wanting to have another workshop. But the importance of this workshop was two things. Number one, we did get to hear from concerned citizens. And even though the number of folks who spoke today was relatively small, it is those folks who participate in these type of forums are the ones who are actively engaged in some type of issue or some type of community project. So I really do appreciate all the folks, individuals and groups who have spoken today. I think it's critically important that we heard from them. But the other thing that was important to me is that while I sat in with various groups, meeting with Tracy, 2 of us at a time or 3 of us at a time, this is the first time that I was able to hear from my colleagues. And that, to me, is one of the most important things that we have done today, is to hear the collective wisdom of our fellow colleagues. While I've had side conversations with most of you, I appreciate Councilmember Parker. She called me immediately after the Shade 1B was produced, and offered me her thoughts and comments about that. And I think that was just really important to hear from her early. And she mimicked a lot of what she told me today. And Councilmember Seekins and I've had a lot of discussions along with Councilmember Brady. So this is an important process. And my concern with what we had done in the past was that we had not opened it up to the public. We were not acting in what I thought was a more transparent form. So we've accomplished that. And I have to tell you that I am persuaded by a lot of the comments I heard from our citizens and a lot of the comments I heard from my colleagues today. It helps us make decisions. And I don't like making decisions in the vacuum as to what I perceive or what I think. So let's call this as soon as we can. I agree with that process. I agree with Councilmember Waring's suggestion. We just need to make a vote on this thing as soon as possible as to whether or not we're just leaning towards a single member district for council for Johns Island. So thank you all for your participation, our citizens and various groups. And thank you, my colleagues, for taking the time to sit out on this afternoon so I could hear from all of y'all today.
Thank you, sir. Back to Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Shade. Yes, we know that Johns Island did not want, every time you moved me over there, they said no. No, but Tracy, I was just wondering if we could get an option 3. Again, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I'm just kidding. But I second what you say, Councilmember Shade. I think the most important thing for me as a new council member, and this being my first process, Councilmember Mitchell, you've been through this. So hearing all of that information, I don't want to put my fellow council members on the spot, Councilmember Sacker and Councilmember Gregory. I mean, we all know that this affects certain districts greatly. I even see chunks of West Ashley being moved around. So I just hope it's really important for me to hear from all avenues, especially I understand that the options that are on the table, and it sure, like I said before, the public comment sounds like they like option 2, but we are losing someone who's represented James Island for a long time. And so these folks, these council members' thoughts are, I appreciate them and want to hear them. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Councilmember Seekings?
I just wasn't clear when Julia talked with us about our options, whether we can vote on an ordinance on Tuesday, which I wholeheartedly believe we can do. I think it's consistent with what Councilmember Waring has observed. Option 2 gives us that option of having a Johns Island district. I mean, the ordinance language, I believe, is fairly boilerplate. It's the map that we attach to it that then gets adopted. So, I mean, if we keep putting this off, we're going to get into January and February before we have redistricting done. And we just can't do that anymore. We did this in 2 months last time. We're going to take 2 years. And it's just time for us to vote.
We plan
So, Julia, can we do that on Tuesday? Can we give first reading to an ordinance and still have some conversation?
This coming Tuesday to show your preference. And what Julia said a minute ago was they would prefer to bring us the ordinance at the subsequent meeting, which would not be next year, but would be the subsequent meeting. But Julia, am I reading that differently or?
I mean, I think that we posted a public hearing for all 3 maps. We could certainly have an ordinance, or we could have a first reading on an ordinance on a particular map, if that is the map the council wants to adopt at first reading at the next meeting.
Great.
It's all about notice.
I mean,
Notice. Right. Okay. Councilmember Parker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One last question. Could
Yeah.
we just clarify the special elections and the districts? Councilmember Mitchell, you mentioned before, it's an odd and even. Does this trigger a special election for both? I think, Tracy, this is a question for you, maybe.
Probably tag team between Julia and I. I think obviously the first option is, what plan do you adopt, and then what is the effective date of that plan? And then I think that when you want it to become effective is going to kind of drive the path forward with whether or not you're going to need a special election. Does that help?
So let's go ahead and talk about that. So I'm just going to assume, can we just assume for a minute that I think we're going to have a consensus on option 2. And so explain to us how that would play out after that in terms of the effective date and how that could impact whether you had a special election or not.
Sure. So when we talked about this at the last council meeting, we kind of made the initial assumption that the effective date would be the next election cycle. So they would go into effect 2023. So that would mean in either case, so if 3 is the number that moves off the peninsula, 3 is up for an election in the next cycle anyway. And so there would just be somebody, hopefully, that would come forward to run for that district in the next election. If 6 is the number that moves, then there would be a special election for District 6. And I'm using the word special because if it's effective on the election date, it would still be on the same date with the other elections. We would just have District 6 on the election as well. And then District 3 would remain on the peninsula. And so then if Councilmember Gregory and Saccharin both choose to run for that district, they would both live in that district and could run in that election.
Does that
help?
Mr. Mayor, I think you may have misspoken, Tracy. You said if 3 remained on the peninsula? I thought 3 in this option 2 would go to Johns Island.
So in this option,
maybe I wasn't clear with what you said.
no, that's okay. In this option 2, we didn't make any kind of assumption. We knew that one of the numbers would have to move, and it's the same plan. So that makes sense. Does that help?
Same map other than the council district. And so under one way, you would have 6 districts up for election. That's if you made the effective date November a year from now. And if you did it the other way, you'd have 7 districts up for election that day. One would happen to be a special election and 6 of them would be the regular election. Does that sound right? No, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, back to Councilmember Saccharin and then Shade.
Mayor, Councilmember Gregory hasn't spoken yet, and he has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see.
You can go. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was trying to figure out the scenarios and correct me if I'm wrong. If 6 remains on the peninsula, okay, and 3 goes to the island,
right,
then 3's election would be the election coming up. Okay?
That's correct.
Okay, now, but if 6 remains on the if 6 goes to
John's
John
Island,
okay, that would warrant a special election for 6. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's with the assumption that your effective date would be the next election cycle.
Okay, which means that 6 would then run this election cycle coming up. And the odd, and the odd, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just just for clarity.
And so I presume we would just, under that scenario, I presume we would just make it a 2-year term, right? Because then the 2 years from next November, then you'd want all the even numbered districts back together, right?
I don't know.
Right.
I think that's right. Councilmember Saccharin?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to tag on to what Dudley said. Him and I were on the same page regarding the questions. So just for council members' edification, essentially, if either one of our districts is collapsed, if 3 is collapsed, it goes out to John's Island, I will not have an election to run in.
That's correct.
So that's one scenario. If 6 is collapsed, Dudley would have to run in an election again after having just run an election a year and a half ago. So those are the 2 scenarios. Just want to make sure we're all clear.
Fundamental difference, correct.
And only been, Mr. Mayor, just so that we all clear, we were sworn in January. I've just been serving my constituents now for the last, 10 months? Just so that we're all on the same page.
Right, of a 4-year term. I understand.
Okay.
Councilmember Shade.
This is a dilemma that I think that I was trying to avoid with the 1B, and I appreciate the conversations that have been expressed. And so the people who are going to be vastly impacted by this is going to be Councilmember Saccharin and Councilmember Gregory and the districts they represent. So if we designate the Johns Island district to be District 6, then what we have essentially done is overcome the will of the people who voted for him 2 years ago. In other words, we are kicking him off his seat, even though he was duly elected for a 4-year term. And I just don't know if we can do that legally. That's a huge problem for me, to remove a council member who was duly elected just 2 years ago. And we've eliminated his seat, not by an election, but by a redistricting plan. And that seems to me immensely unfair. Likewise, if we designate the Johns Island district as District 3, we have, and even though Councilman Saccharin would normally be up for re-election, we have precluded him from being able to run for re-election in any capacity because he's outside of District 3's jurisdiction. That's a huge dilemma we've got to think through carefully when this thing comes up for a vote at the appropriate time. And I think y'all have expressed it. I just wanted to add my echo to that, is that either way we are doing a disservice to either the constituents who voted for these two council members or to the council members themselves. And that's just something we just need to take in consideration as we go through this process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. That's why we're having this discussion today, just so we are fully aware of the circumstances. Councilmember Waring?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it'd be good if we can provide all members of council what transpired, I don't know, what was it? I guess 20 years ago. Actually, every census, 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago. This isn't a situation that had presented itself before the city and council and citizens before. I see Tracy nodding her head. 20 years ago, the even number districts were up, and two districts, to use the term of, I think it's very appropriate, Councilman Sackler said, were collapsed into one. Council Member Mitchell spoke about that. But I think it'd be good to let the actual, it's already documented for all 12 members of council to know that. 10 years ago, after the 2010 census, the exact same thing happened, and the odd number seats was up. And the seat that Council Member Brady represents right now, one of the finest people we all know is Reverend Jimmy Gallant. He represented District 5, but because of the population shift, remember, we've said this before, I always like to refer to the district I represent. Not the district, not my district. It's not a personal possession. When those odd number seats were up, the population had shifted, and believe it or not, some of the same terminology that people on Johns Island are using, the redheaded, maybe they didn't say redheaded stepchild, I said that, but the stepchild reference, people West Ashley was using it. You had districts on the peninsula that had 4,000 people in it, and a district like Larry Shirley had 11,000 people. So you got away from one man, one vote, and that district number 5 came West Ashley, and that's the first person to run and win that was Marvin Wagner, and currently Councilmember Brady certainly won it. He represents it very well now. So this isn't something where our history, and we're a city that's steeped in history all the way back to 1670. Our history since single member districts have been created in the city of Charleston. When the odd number seats are up, those are the ones that determine if something gets collapsed or not, if that's the election cycle. And then when 2 years later, if it's an even number election cycle, the same point that the mayor was trying to kind of stumbled over a little bit, and I think we all did. If you have that special election for number 6, then 2 years later, they got to run again. We created that situation. Listen, if District 7 was to move over to Johns Island, I don't live on Johns, but if I truly wanted to run for that seat, I can go buy a piece of property on Johns Island. I can go rent an apartment on Johns Island. I can raise money and I can run for that seat. And if the people voted me in, I would represent them. If they voted somebody else in, that's the way it is. So I want to compliment Councilmember Sackler. Frankly, he's been a gentleman. Go back to our last council meeting, speaking about the sensitivities of it. It's sensitive because we all know them, and we all friends with them, and we all like them. But if you look at it from a population shift and having congruency with odd, even election cycle and staying within that system that has worked. And remember now, it hadn't worked for the individuals. That odd, even system works for the people. The people voice every 4 years. And Councilmember Shayade, you're right. 10 months ago, people ran, or they got sworn in, but they went in front of all these even number seats, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, went in front of the public, and the public said, one way or the other, these are the people we want to represent us. And I think that's the strongest. I never, kind of like overturning a will, Councilmember Appel. I'm told that's very hard to do in the state of South Carolina. And I hope it stays that way. And I think when it comes to overturning the will of the people, in particular the ballot box, I hope we don't go against that. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. All good comments. Councilmember Parker.
Councilmember Gregory still has his hand up. I don't know if it's.
Did you want to be recognized again, Councilmember Gregory? Sometimes folks don't take their hand back down.
I didn't take my hand down. No, I didn't.
That's okay. That's what I figured. Just give me a what if. I mean, this was technically 2020 redistricting. So let's just say y'all had chosen option 2 in, I may not be proving a point here, but in 2020, if option 2 had been chosen, 6 would have had an election. It's sort of the same thing, right? 6 would have had an election. If you had moved 1 to the island, you would have chosen to move. I don't know if it proves a point or doesn't, but is it because we're off years? Would your decision have been different in 2020? I guess is my question.
It would not have been. And of course, we didn't have the census data in time to have made this decision before the 2020 election. But it's just I asked a little while ago to go back one more time and look at the map. Was there another odd numbered district on the peninsula that you could collapse along with 3 so that both council members had to run anyway, like happened under Councilmember Mitchell's scenario? But there's none other on the peninsula. All the other districts are even, right?
Okay, all right. I was just curious. Putting
I
it
do.
out there. I did.
Yeah.
I wish that y'all had done this before I got here, but I've enjoyed the process.
If I might, the previous 2 times, though, we weren't delayed because of a pandemic. And so when we did get the census data, we did have a pending election. And so that's why, to Councilmember Seeking's point before, we did move very, very fast. But you all decided to move forward with an election with the current districts because we did not know when we were going to get the census data due to the pandemic. So I think that's getting to your first initial question, that it may have been different. I wanted to be honest and clear about that.
and I guess I just want to be honest with that statement too, since we're talking openly. I mean, I ask that because obviously, like you said, Councilmember Waring, I mean, it is a sensitive situation, right? So I just ask that because it's certainly, now we're asking, it's sort of a double-edged sword. Of course, we're listening to the community. We know what they want, and that is, our priority, but we do have to make that decision per se, right? So I was just kind of asking that in a sense to look at the years, the odd year and the even year, would it have been different? But redistricting just happened to be 2 years late, unfortunately. So.
All right. Any other thoughts, comments, Councilmember Seekings?
Well, and I'll talk about this, I guess, on Tuesday, but I think one of the options we haven't talked about, and it also points up one of the complications with option 2, if we put a 3 on the Johns Island district, is this. I mean, the people who came out tonight from the public in particular who advocated for version 2, as their basic thesis, it's been that Johns Island has waited too long to have their own representation as they've grown over the course of the last 10 and 20 years. If we pick up option 2 and vote in favor of it, and we put a number 3 on Johns Island, and then we wait until this November to have an election, you won't have a seated council member for that newly adopted district until January. That's a year and 4 months away from now. I mean, if we vote for option 2 and put a 3 on it, I, with all due respect, believe that it is our obligation. It may not be fair, as Councilmember Shade pointed out, but it's not unconstitutional. The flip side of that is we have a constitutional obligation of one person, one vote, and to even out these districts. And if we adopt a map and hold off on it for over a year, we probably are going to be standing outside of our constitutional obligation. So it's something we need to think about. If we put a 2 option with a 3 number on it, a special election is something that we as a city council need to consider given our obligations constitutionally and the reason we adopted, if we do adopt this version 2. Leading with my chin, it's one reason why I am not in favor of option 2. There are a number of others too, but sounds like a majority is, but I think we just need to think about that if in fact the reason we're doing this is to give Johns Island its representation it's been waiting on for so long.
Well, there's always that, but then don't you have the same situation we just discussed about District 6 that, I mean, District Councilmember Saccharin would not fulfill his 4-year cycle that he was elected to represent his constituents. So,
and again, that's a question of fairness, not constitutionality. Our constitutional obligation is to balance these districts, to have them be equally represented across the board. And as we went through in 2010, and it was very painful, there was a big unfair part of it. We pitted not only 2 very good council members against each other because of the way the numbers worked out, but 2 good friends. That happened. It was unfair, but it wasn't unconstitutional. And one of them didn't fill out their constitutional term. They stepped aside. So again, it's just one of the byproducts of adopting 2, which I would advocate for all of you we should not do. I think I'm going to be in the minority on that. I think 1A is the right way to go. But if we do go with 2, I think we need to take a hard look at how we align it and how we make sure that that seat, that district that we're going to create, that new district, is filled with a representative, and to wait a year and a half seems incongruous with the reasoning for doing what we're contemplating doing.
November of next year is 13 months away.
And then they wouldn't be seated until January.
Well, and with a special election, that would, if the seat were unfilled, would not, that's a special election, even though it would be held next November. Wouldn't the council member, whoever gets elected, be able to take office like immediately after the election?
Okay, even if that's correct, and assuming it is, that's still 13 or 14 months away.
Okay, so as a practical matter, I must say, you create a new district. I mean, there's no candidates out there right now. People have to make decisions about whether they want to run for office or not. It takes them a little time to think about that and to run a campaign. So you do have to allow, I mean, if you approve that new district tomorrow, you can't have an election like instantaneously either. You need a little time for the candidates to make their decisions and come forth. So, but since you've raised the question, Julia, you got to tell us by Tuesday, if we set the effective date for this next November, is there something unconstitutional about that? That's the first time that question has come up, to me at least.
No, Your Honor. I mean, I'd have to brush off the old slides that I presented to you guys about a year and a half ago. But there is case law that supports the notion of waiting till the November election. I think also we need to have the voice of Isaac Kramer from the County Election Commission a part of this conversation as well, so he can at least answer the question of practically speaking, how they can accommodate a special election if that is where council chooses to go, and what date they could practically set it for. And those are things he's got some pretty strong opinions about. So we probably need to have him at the October 11th meeting as well. But it is not unconstitutional to hold off until the November 23 election.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2017, the people on Johns Island voted, just like everybody else in the odd number district. And they voted for Councilmember Brady. They are represented by representation on council. Now, their preference is they have somebody live on Johns Island. That's not a constitutionality. The people in 2017, I'm right. Yeah. No, 2000. 2019, the odd number seats were up. Okay. And the people in Johns Island made the decision between Councilmember Wagner and Councilmember Brady. So to say that they're not represented constitutionally, Councilmember Seekins, I'm not an attorney, but I beg to differ with you on that. And I think
Well, it's not what I said, but that's okay.
Well, you did say that for however many months they wouldn't be represented. They're represented currently by Councilmember Brady. So I don't think any, and it's just a normal election cycle. And they elected Councilmember Brady to represent them for 4 years. And come 2023, that 4-year period would be up for another choice. Now, obviously, looks like he's not going to be the one on the ballot, but there'll be somebody else on the ballot. So I respectfully, you're my desk mate, but I hate to, I think I disagree with you on that one. But those people exercise their right to vote just like everybody else did during 2019 in those odd number districts. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? I think we kind of covered the waterfront here, didn't we, Tracy? Okay. Anybody else? Last call. Madam Clerk, anything else for us? All right, hearing none, we stand adjourned and we'll see y'all next Tuesday. Looking forward to it. Thank you.